Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here doing my Throwback Thursday review for Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. If you guys haven't seen my review for the first Evil Dead, I'll put a link in the description of that and you guys can go ahead and check that out. I'm going to be doing all four of the films because I realized that when I was doing my last review, I was like, oh yeah, I actually have all three of the original films plus the remake all on Blu-ray, so I was like, well, I'm just going to do like a month of Evil Dead movies. So going into Evil Dead 2, of course, it is the sequel, which a lot of people consider like a pseudo-remake of the first film, and I've never really seen it that way because like I get why people say that because of course it's Ash somewhat going through the same situation as he does in the first film where it's like he's in the cabin and then there's other people with him. But I feel like it really changes the movie. It's like it would in real life. You have this set of people in the first movie and then a completely different set of people in the sequel, and I feel like that's what really changes the second movie around. Not to mention the fact that it does, it isn't like a full remake. It's kind of like that, but it does actually have the story of the first film, which is how this movie actually starts. Has like the little quick recap, like this was bad, that sucked for him. He's taken over, then the sun comes up, and now he's free. And then unfortunately, he has to deal with like all the madness of having to chop his hand off and all that craziness. And that's before the other characters even show up. So we have pretty much like all the worst stuff that happens to him is him, like, well, I don't know, it's hard to say if it's the worst stuff, but a lot of really bad stuff happens to him when he's all alone. He's going crazy and he has to chop his own hand off, and it's just nuts. Like, he's dealing with all this crap by himself. And then we have our other, our two new groups of characters coming in. So we have two new couples. Once again, it's almost like the same thing as the first movie where you have like two couples and one person is kind of sitting out. Ash is now that person that's on the outside because he was one of the couples in the first movie. And so you have these two couples come in, instantly see Ash, and it's like, holy crap, he murdered the person that used to, live in this cabin, which I guess was okay, so this I'll say because I'm terrible with names. I don't remember anyone's name except for Ash. But basically, the daughter of the man who actually owned the cabin, she comes in and everyone freaks out like, oh, he must have killed him, which I always thought was kind of weird, where it's like, okay, well, why think that he was dead in the cabin after all this time? It was like kind of a weird thing to me. Where I was like, that never really made a lot of sense to me why they would assume that he did it. Like, based on kind of how the movie played out, it was like, wouldn't she know that her dad was dead like a super long time ago, and just certain elements like that. And there might be some stuff that I'm not remembering dialogue-wise where they do explain that, but there's always something where I was like, that's kind of weird to me. Like, why would they think that he was the one that killed him just recently? But it was a lot to take in at once, where it's like, this dude is going nuts, and if I remember right, it was like in the middle of him, freaking out. So they come in, and it's like, alright, well, we got to send you down into the cellar, so of course that's terrible. Ash is about to get killed, and then they realize he's not crazy. The situation is actually crazy, so of course he ends up being saved last second. And that's when things really get bad, because people just start going back and forth. It's like, this person's taken over, that person's taken over, this person takes off into the forest and gets killed. And then it comes down to, and obviously I skipped a lot there, but then it comes down to our last three characters. And so, a lot of horror movies have this. I think a lot of good ones do at least. Where you have that person that you just hate. At some point, you're just like, that person's dumb. I wish they were dead already. And that's what happens when it comes down to Ash, the daughter of the, well, I'll just go with scientist, the daughter of the scientist, and then, like, the hillbilly dude. So he freaks out, and it's like, like, he forces Ash to leave, and that's when things just get nuts, because him sending Ash out, basically, when that happens, Ash ends up turning. So he turns again. He ends up fighting with the dude on the outside. He's trying to break back into the cabin, and so we have one person left on the inside. She now has like this crazy bone blade, and so she's trapped inside the cabin with Ash like bashing on the windows and stuff. And of course, she assumes that it's Ash at the door who's about to like burst in, and she ends up stabbing the guy in his stomach. And I was like, wow, that's how he died. It was one of those weird things where it was like, I'm kind of satisfied with that because it's his own fault, and it's always like that in horror movies where it's like that idiot person, and then that's how they're their own worst enemy. Like, he's the reason he got killed because he was freaking out at the last minute, and suddenly it was just like, this is happening, I got to be crazy now, and it's like, that's dumb. That's a dumb idea. So of course he ends up getting stabbed. It's still a crazy moment when that happens, when he gets stabbed, because then it's like, crap. Well, what's going to happen now? Because she tries to kind of save him after stabbing him, and she's dragging him, and he's got the gun, and it's like, what do we do? Like, this dude's injured now, and I want to protect him, but also I'm kind of trapped with crazy Ash running around, and so of course he does end up getting into the cabin. Fortunately, he has the necklace of his girlfriend, and that ends up like saving him and bringing him, putting him back to normal again. So once again, he's back to normal. It's just the two of them now, and it's like, well, we gotta find some way to banish this. They go through, early on, where it's like she has the, new pages of the Necronomicon, which is why she was going to the cabin to begin with. They show, great foreshadowing, because I had no idea about this when I first saw the film, but they show, like, the image, and it ends up being Ash thrown back in time, but it's like, there's this great hero who defeated all the Deadites in the past, and I think Ash made, I can't remember what he said, but he's made, like, some sort of reference, like, oh, he didn't do that great of a job, and of course it ended up being him. So I love that bit of foreshadowing there, and of course they go through and they're fighting, basically the personified version of this Deadite energy, and it's this giant creature at the door. And I remember when I first saw this movie, this really affected me. So it got down to like our last two characters, right? And typically, horror movie is like, oh, you typically have it like this, where two people end up surviving. Some movies, of course, it comes down to one person. And in this case, I thought it was going to be two. I remember thinking that the whole way through the movie, like, they've gone through all this crazy stuff. They're at the end, it's the end of the movie, they're fighting the giant personification. They defeated every person that's mutated. They beat, like, Henrietta, who turns into, like, her crazy mutated form. All this stuff. They've gone through all these crazy moments, and they made it all the way to the end. And then it wraps all the way back around to Ash by himself, where the hand, of course it's movies, but it's like the hand somehow crawled up her back and she never felt it, and it stabbed her in the back with the blade, and it killed her as she's reading the final pieces of the incantation, which does ultimately dispel the spirit, and she still dies. And I was like, wow, when I first saw that, that like blew my mind that she actually died that close to the end of the film. And then of course right after that, everything is, taken away, all the demons and stuff, and everything's gone. But then Ash is being pulled out of the cabin as well, and he's holding onto that board, and it just snaps and throws him back in time. And I just remember thinking, this is a crazy effing ending to a movie where they're right at the end, she gets stabbed in the back, he gets thrown back in time, and then he's the warrior that they read about, in the scripture. And I was just like, man, that is effing insane. Like, that, it was such a crazy ending to me when I first saw it. And it's still a crazy ending. It's such a good way to kind of end the movie and throw him back into the past. And of course that leads into Army of Darkness, which I always hated that. And obviously this is more the fault of Army of Darkness than it is Evil Dead 2, because Evil Dead 2 came first. But I always hated that they changed the ending of this movie and the beginning of the third movie to where he's like revered at the end of this when he goes back in time. And it's like, oh man, he's like, so they're like praising him and stuff, and he's freaking out yelling no. And then in the third movie, he instantly like gets captured and put in chains and stuff, and I was like, that always bugged me. It was always that weird continuity thing, or it's like the first and second movie, that's always, one of those weird issues people have. But it was like, those easily flow in order. Like, that's not even that crazy to put together. That was just totally different. It was like, one is him, at the end of this movie being celebrated, and then the beginning of the third movie is him just being like hated and, being like this random person who gets arrested. It's just like, always bugged me. But obviously, like I said, that has a lot more to do with Army of Darkness than it does Evil Dead 2, because that was just the actual story of Evil Dead 2, and then Army of Darkness is what changed it. But love this film so much, and I like the way it played out. I like the fact that, in a weird sense, it is kind of a remake. That's always the thing that comes up, where it's like, it's almost like the first movie. But I feel like there are more than enough differences because of the characters. Like, especially the element of having someone who's related to the actual person that owned the cabin, and having these extra pages and getting, legitimate insight. Like, they didn't really know much outside of, in the first movie at least, it was just like monsters and it was this recording. But in the second movie, it's like you deal with Henrietta in the basement and getting the weird ghost spirit of her dad and stuff, because he died in the house, or in the cabin. And it was just like a million different things that were kind of added just because of that these new characters coming in, them throwing him into the basement. It was like, I felt like there was so much extra added to the story of the Necronomicon, even after, technically it was destroyed in the first movie. But I love that. I like that idea of adding those new characters in, and just the way that played out, because it was, in the first movie, it's just like a horror movie where it's like, what is this? What in the world's happening? And then the sequel, it's like, no, we know what's happening. At least after it's obviously in the very beginning, it was still just like Ash by himself, and then the very beginning of the people coming in, it was Ash as the bad guy, and they didn't really know what was going on. And then they start to realize, like, holy crap, this is truly happening. Like, the Deadites are already here, and we got to figure out a way to stop this. So I've always kind of liked that idea, and maybe that's why the sequel is always like so revered, because this is, this Evil Dead 2 is inarguably the most famous piece of like Evil Dead period. Like out of all the movies, the current TV show, comics, and video games, Evil Dead 2 is like where things truly started. And it's like that iconic image of Ash with his boomstick and then the chainsaw for the hand. That's Evil Dead 2. Like, that's not Evil Dead 1. He uses the chainsaw. But Evil Dead 2 is the one where it's like, he has to chop his hand off, and now he has, a chainsaw on his right hand. For anyone who didn't know, this is super random, but the reason it was, they chopped off his right hand is because Bruce Campbell is left-handed, so it was like, well, if I'm going to use one hand, it should be my dominant hand. So I remember hearing that in an interview like a little while ago, not too long ago, because I was looking up a bunch of Bruce Campbell stuff when I was watching the last season of Ash vs. Evil Dead. But I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I always kind of wondered that. I was like, man, I wonder why they did that hand, because I'm right-handed, so like that would have been terrible. I would have been like, I can't catch stuff because like it's just my coordination is not great with my left hand. But that's why, for anyone who I'm sure you were never wondering, but that's why, in case you were. But this is the one where it's like, it's always there. This is why I saw this movie like 2 or 3 times before I even got to see the original, because the sequel is just like blew up everything, and then it was like you can never find the first movie. Like I mentioned this in my last review, but I saw this movie a couple times because the first movie was never on cable. It was like always Evil Dead 2, and it was like I love the movie, and it was one of those things where it was like I was trying to get into watching Evil Dead because I'd heard so much about it because it's Evil Dead. And I was like, you know what? I gotta watch Evil Dead. And I was like, I can't find the first one, so that's why I watched the sequel first. And I'd seen it a couple times. And I was like, man, someday the first Evil Dead has to come on TV. I remember like years and years ago, I was always checking. I would always just type in like Evil Dead in the search thing, like, when is the first one gonna come on? Like it was never on cable. And then eventually I got to see the first movie, and it just took forever. But that just kind of gives that testament. Like, even though the first movie's still great, it's just the sequel just did it better, and it was just one of those things where it did get better, with the sequel, and that's why it kind of blew up that way. And we always see Evil Dead 2 over Evil Dead 1. It kind of did what the first movie did much better, even though the first movie already did it really great. The sequel just did it in an amazing way, I guess. But really loved the second movie. Excited to get to Army of Darkness, and then eventually the remake, even though of course that's obviously totally like different universes. I guess we can count it as a different universe. But I'm excited to go through Army of Darkness again. It's been a minute since I've seen Army of Darkness, and obviously it's very different. It's like, this was, as it went on, they got funnier, of course, and this was like that perfect blend of the horror and the comedy. And then Army of Darkness, excuse me, took it like to the whole full-on comedy level. I still love that movie, but I do love the horror elements of the 2 Evil Dead movies, and maybe that's why they changed it to officially Army of Darkness and not like Evil Dead 3, because it was such a departure from like the original nature of these, the first 2 films, and it's like full-on comedy action movie. But I still really like that movie. I still really love it. I probably, of course, if I had to like pick out of the films, I would pick Evil Dead 2, just because I like the story to it a bit more, with the characters somewhat understanding what's going on. Of course, Ash, the iconic version of Ash that everybody knows with the boomstick and the chainsaw on his hand. That's another reason. It is very cool to watch that. As crazy as it is, it's always super awesome. Like, I love seeing that when I watch this show, and he has to kind of suit up, and he puts he's got the chainsaw and everything. It's just awesome to see every time. So that's another reason. Like, that iconic version of Ash is kind of what everyone goes to when you think Evil Dead. It's Ash with the chainsaw in his hand, even though technically that's only in the second movie and now the TV show, because even in Army of Darkness, he doesn't do that except for like maybe the first 10 minutes, and after he kills that first Deadite, and spoilers I guess, but after that they give him like the magical metal hand, and then he doesn't do it anymore, and it's like, well, that's really only in the second movie when you think about it. And then like the games and stuff, if you play those, there's like the alternate timeline where he doesn't get tossed back in time, and it's a PS2 game. Mentioned that in my last review as well. Never played it, but that was always the story, and I think that story is also what leads to the comic books. Like, he's never thrown back in time or anything. It's just he gets sent like to an insane asylum, which makes a lot of sense. But things start to play out, and it's like, hey, surprise, surprise, the Deadites end up here as well, because he never went back in time to officially defeat them. So it was very interesting. But Evil Dead 2 is definitely the one that people go to the most, and I can easily understand why, because I do love it. I would, like I said, I would choose this out of all the films. I would definitely choose this, even over the remake. I love the remake though, but I would still choose this one. It's it's got Bruce Campbell. It's got that iconic version of Ash, and just the story of it has always entertained me. Like knowing or having that addition, especially if you do watch the first movie, is like seeing what this one character went through both films is always very entertaining to watch, because it's one of those type of movies where it's like you can just watch 1 and 2 together and it's just one super long movie and it works perfectly. Like I love when movies do this. Like Back to the Future 2 and 3, they're literally tied together. Like it's here and here, and that's exactly how the first and second movie are. Even if that's not how it was planned initially, that's exactly how it plays out. So I love that for sure. But those are my thoughts on this film. Of course, my Throwback Thursday reviews typically, this is more probably the biggest, most actual review I've done. Normally it's just like, I like this and I like that, but that's kind of what I did last week, so I had to make an actual review of the film, because I was kind of just being like, I like Evil Dead and I like this and I like that, so I had to actually make a real review this time. But I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this. Of course, would love to know what you guys thought about the film. I dropped my remote, so I had to. I dropped it at like the very beginning. That's what that noise was. But I'd love to know what you guys think of Evil Dead. Is it your or Evil Dead 2? Is it your favorite Evil Dead? Is it maybe your least favorite Evil Dead movie? Evil Dead. Crap. I can't remember if I mentioned this in my first review or not. But I want to say the first Evil Dead is going to be shown at the Redford Theater sometime soon. I really need to get on that because I don't remember the exact date and I don't want to miss it. But the actual original Evil Dead will be showing in Detroit, where it first ever premiered, and Bruce Campbell will actually be there. So definitely look that up. I believe it's redfordtheater.com. And you can get some tickets to that and see Bruce Campbell, see Evil Dead. Should be super awesome. I plan on going to that for sure, and I really hope I don't miss it. I know it hasn't happened yet. I'm just hoping I really don't miss it, because I definitely got to check that. But if you're interested, you can actually just, see Evil Dead at an old school theater in Detroit and have a really good time there with a bunch of other, Evil Dead fans and nerds, because it'll be pretty awesome and I'm excited for that. But definitely want to know what you guys think of Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. Like I said, I want to know if this is, where does this stick in the timeline as far as, your favorite or least favorite things from the Evil Dead franchise. It doesn't even have to just be like the movies and then the TV show. It doesn't have to like go in order. It could be like across the board, like the games and the comics, everything. Where does this kind of sit for you as far as Evil Dead? Just the, the brand itself. Like, is it like right at the top? Somewhere in the middle, maybe towards the bottom for me. And I think for most people, admittedly, because of how iconic Evil Dead 2 is to just the brand and how it changed Ash to be that iconic version that everyone thinks of, I would probably say it's right at the top. Number 2, for me at least, would probably be the remake, which might be crazy, but that was a great remake. I really love that remake, and it was a truly modern version of Evil Dead. Like, they did the gore, and it wasn't over the top. It, like, somehow, as over the top as it was still great. It wasn't like Saw over the top, where it's like, that just, crazy traps and ridiculous. It's like, no, that's exactly what would happen in Evil Dead, and it works. Right after that would probably be this TV show, and then and then Army of Darkness for me. And I never really read the comics or played the video game, so I can't exactly rate them. I played like the game based on Evil Dead 1, I think, and that scared me as a kid, because I never knew what to do, and it was just a dark game, and you get chased by like a skeleton. It was really weird. But I remember that, and it like freaked me out as a kid. But if I played it now, I'd be like, I just don't know what to do, and it wouldn't scare me as much. But it scared me then, because I was really young. But that's my ranking for it. We'd love to know your ranking and just what you guys think of Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. And of course, if you guys have any suggestions for films I should do as far as throwback reviews, I kind of have a cap, basically like 10 years or older, then I can review it. But just let me know in the comment section what you think about this, and if you have any suggestions, please put them down there as well. And of course, thanks for watching.